Hi, today we're going to make a do-it-yourself silicon block layout frame system to use with your stained glass projects. And as usual in the description section, I'm going to list some of the supplies that I've used in case you'd like to see where I get them. As an Amazon affiliate marketer, I do earn a small commission if you do click on my links. Number one, you want to gather your supplies. You're going to want some kind of silicone tray, an adhesive, and some kind of plastic or matte square. So this is a silicone tray. You can get them on Amazon. I think I got this one on Temu, but I will list ones that you can get on Amazon. I would just try to find the least expensive one that you can. Now, you want a pretty big square tray probably, so that you have a large square to work with. But you also don't want to spend tons of money probably. You also want to have the inside of the tray to be really sharp edges so that you have a really nice square. You also want a slight lip around it. You see that lip around the top? I'm going to be using that to help attach my square, my silicone to my square so that it'll be helpful. Now, this is sort of like instead of using those metal layout systems that you can get, which are basically about a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square angle that is anywhere from like 6 to 18 inches long. And you would use that to help keep your project square when you're doing some kind of framing work. Well, I wanted something that is not going to stick to solder. So if I use an old mat that I happen to have, because they're nice and square, and I use this nice silicone tray, I can make a nice angle for me to use when I'm doing my projects. Now with scissors and a mat knife, I'm cutting off these little knobs that this particular tray came with. So some of the ones you buy may not have little knobs on them. Some might have big knobs, but do look at what holds them square, because you're going to want to probably cut off some of that when you're making your little framing square thing. So I tried to find one that just had little notches, and I cut those off. And what I can do is I also use a mat knife or a razor blade, X-Acto blade, whatever you want to call it, to make it really, really sharp right at that point, because that's where I'm going to glue and attach that mat board that I had to hold this silicone nice and square to use in my system. So I am using a knife here, and I'm getting rid of some of this. I don't want to get rid of more than I need to, because that little rib there that I'm cutting into is actually helping to stiffen the side of this frame. So I don't really want to get rid of all of it. Now, as you can see, my mat board just kind of slips right into there. And as long as I glue it and hold it right against the cardboard there, it's going to end up being pretty darn square. So that's what I'm after. So remember, silicone is nice because you can clean silicone completely. So if you get flux on it, you can clean it right off. And so this is a board with some silicone on it already, and then I have a piece of paper underneath the layer of silicone that has like a grid on it. So I'm going to use that to help line it up when I attach them together. The reason I'm using the mat board is because it is cheap and I already have it. So it was just something I had around the house. So anything will do. And the next thing I'm going to be using is a plastic framing square. So that's something you can use also. So here again, I'm showing you my tray that I'm putting it on. I'm going to line it up with the grid, and I'm going to be using this high temperature RTV silicone glue. Now, there's lots of different adhesives out there. So I'm going to be gluing this together. So as long as when you get your adhesive, you get an adhesive that goes silicone to silicone so that you know that it's going to stick. Because silicone itself kind of resists sticking to anything. And that's one of the reasons we love using silicone. It's also, it works in high temperatures without melting. So that's another reason I love silicone. So right now I am squeezing it in that crease right along the silicone. As you can see, I'm trying to keep it away from the edge because I'm going to glue on the mat board and I don't really want it seeping out. So you don't really need very much glue, but you need to use some. Now I'm using my grid to help line up so I make sure it's nice and square. And then I'm going to take my mat board and slide it in. Remember, I made those little grooves, so I can slide it right in and push it into the mat board so that they are nice and close together. Now I have all these push pins, which are really great to use because they're easy to take on and off. One of the I'm using a metal framing square right there to try to keep it square. One of the things I like about using the mat board is you can push the push pin right through the mat board and the silicone without having to drill holes or anything like that. So it's really easy to do. Now I have this leftover part of my tray, so I decided that why not use this, and I'll make some more, but these will be like inside corners if I'm making something, or I could use it as a straight edge. There's other things I might want to use it for, but since I have this nice piece, why not use it? And notice that this tray that I'm using also is pretty hefty. It's not a thin tray. So don't buy a tray that is really wimpy and thin, because it won't be quite as exact once you glue it all together. Now, because I'm using plastic framing squares for this one, I got some really thin plastic framing squares. I can't just put the push pin through the framing square because it's plastic. So I'm going to use a drill and drill holes every so often so that I have holes to use. Of course, more holes the better in a way, because then you can choose what holes you want to use. So I thought I could drill it through both of these thin plastic framing squares at once, and that didn't really work out. So I did them one at a time. And I decided I'm going to go right down the middle, so then I can put glue on either side of the holes to help hold this all together. And of course, you're going to have to make sure when you start drilling these that there's no problem of your plastic framing square cracking, because sometimes plastic does tend to crack when you're drilling. I am just using a wood drill. I didn't get anything special for this, and they're not cracking or anything, so I'm not worrying about that. One thing I did have when I was done was there was plastic burrs all over the place. And this is when I get out one of my trusty emery boards, and I use that as a sander to just sand the top and bottom of each hole to make them smooth so they don't have that little burr lip on it. You can use sandpaper, of course. There's a lot of different things you could probably use, but because I always have these emery boards near me, I just grabbed one of them. And I'm not worrying if I sand off the writing a little bit, because really I'm not planning on using the measurements on this thing. I basically wanted the square because it's really, really square. So it's going to be a nice sturdy thing to use. And why am I doing two? Well, because my tray, which is the most expensive thing and hardest to find, I can make two. So why not? I'll just make two while I can, and then I'll have them to use whenever I want to make something that has a frame on it. And with a silicone layout system, your solder can go right to the edge. You don't have to leave like a little gap there because you're worried about the solder sticking to your framing system. You don't have to worry about that. So that's another reason I really love having the silicone. So this fits in very nicely. And now I'm going to get my glue out and make a bead of glue on both sides, and then squish it down. And that tube of glue should last for quite a while. That tube of adhesive, I should call it. But as you notice, the holes that I drilled are still in the non-glued area, and in fact, if the glue actually went through that, you could still probably get the push pin to go through the adhesive. But I was just trying to avoid gluing where the drill line was. Now, after I get done with both of them, I then will pin these to a board to hold them while drying. So I have a board that I've already pinned one to, and I'm going to take another one and get them as square as possible, put some pins in it, and then I have another one. I'm just going to pin them all together. They can hold each other up, keep them nice and square while they're drying. And I think I waited, like 24 hours because that's what the adhesive said to. So I was like, yeah, I'm in no rush. I'll just do the whole 24 hours. So that's where the next one's going to go. Now I know that the mat board and the square are both a little longer than I really need, or the silicone really is, but I guess if later on it's just obnoxious to have those things really long, and longer than the silicone, then at that point I can decide to cut the framing square if I want to. But right now, I'm just going to leave it sticking out longer. And I can even add another piece of silicone from a different tray if I need to. Um, this is kind of a new thing that I came up with, so I'm using a little clamp there to hold it. Um, so yeah, there might be things I would change in the future, but this is what I'm doing now. So I really tried to squeeze them together and make them as square as possible. Because once the adhesive dries, of course, it is what it is. Because one thing about those layout framing systems that you can get, they don't actually have a square, for the corner. So that's what I wanted, was corners. So those usually have just, straight parts. So here I'm using two different ones to make a small coaster. And I have my little glass tiles in there that I lined all up and put them in there. And I'm using two different framing, silicone framing sections that I made. So see how nicely that it holds them all nice and straight, nice and square for this project. And because it's all silicone all the way around, I can just get flux on the board. I can get flux on the corners, on the sides, and I don't really have to worry about any problems. Now, yes, I could make a really short one to go on that open edge right there at the bottom of the screen, because obviously there's nothing there holding it. So yeah, I could make a little short silicone framing thing to put there. I just don't have any pieces left to do another one, and I'm hoping that I won't really need to, that as long as I do the other three sides, I can pretty much keep that side pretty square. I will have a video on working with these little glass squares sometimes. I do have one video on foiling them that's already live. But the next video, I am going to be cutting these little glass squares diagonally so that I can make designs with them, and foiling them individually, and then using my silicone framing system to hold them in place while I solder them. See, they very easily, you can just take the frame off. Nothing stuck to the frame. And then you can pick up your project and nothing stuck to it. It's just all free. I'm going to now use my solder iron and go around the outside of it, because there's foil around the outside of all my little squares, and they also need to be soldered. And then after that, I'm going to make sure that I didn't miss any. I'm going to turn it over. There's little areas that the solder went all the way through, and it is soldered, but then there's other areas where you can see the foil still. So definitely those areas will need a little bit of solder added to them. And I can pretty much not even add solder. I'm just like blending it from the other ones. So I can just scoop my little solder iron right along the top of them, and pretty much it just flows from one to the other. Because remember, the copper foil, solder just loves sticking to copper. So it's just asking to stick to the copper. So as long as there's some flux on it and there's enough solder, you can just go from one to the other and they'll just flow. Now, why do I want a stained glass coaster? I don't know. It's just a nice small project to use my new ideas on. And so that's what I'm making. You always want to turn your project over a few times to make sure there's no globs. Now, I do want to make a border around this, so I'm using 14 gauge and 18 gauge tinned wire and a drill gun, a screw gun, and put my wire in that, and then turn my drill on, and as you can see, that really makes a very nice, tight, symmetrical coil. And I'm measuring how much I actually need. I don't usually cut the wire first. I make the coil first because the wire can get a little smaller as it's being wound up. So it's usually best to just wind it up first and then cut. And then I pinned it to my board and using my push pins again and bending it so that it's square at the edge. And then I soldered it together, and I have these like little rubber feedy things you can get for different projects. People put them on the back of a painting they're hanging in the wall or something. There's lots of things people can do with it. And I put 4 of them on it to hold my coaster off the table when you would use the coaster. So this is the back of the coaster, and this is the front. Thanks for watching, and you have a good day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.